Succession planning is one of the most important jobs that farm families can do, and yet it's one of the most difficult. And in this talk, I want to list the bases that you need to cover, really to provide a roadmap that you can set out and think about where you have to go and the steps you have to cover for good succession planning. It's not a comprehensive talk because it's quite a complex subject. You'll need to chase up information on websites such as those of Farm Management Canada and others. There's quite a lot of support material, but hopefully by providing a checklist, it does give you an outline which you can follow up in detail when you want. So let's look at a checklist for family farm succession. I guess I should start by saying, why is this a subject that I'm passionate about? Well, I was brought up on a family farm, so I've been through the machinations of family farm succession. Some things went well and some things were pretty tough. I've been the principal of an agricultural college, so I've been the meat in the sandwich between parents, and we had lots of parents' weekends where we talked about succession, and students who were getting their formal training, had tons of enthusiasm and were looking to go home and really do some wonderful things. And so working out how the parents and the students could best manage that process was a great task over many years, and I got a lot of experience about the do's and the don'ts. And I've worked out in the industry with many farm families, had some wonderful successes. Regrettably, I've seen a lot of tragedies where succession planning really hasn't been done very well. So what is succession? It's we tend to think that it's a transfer of assets, but it's more than that. It needs to transfer assets, but in the process it needs to build relationships, not destroy relationships. It needs to give a purpose for all the effort that succeeding generations have put into building the business. And we need to really recognise that and recognise what has been done by past generations. And sometimes that tends to be pushed aside a little bit in the process, which is not good. And I see it as an opportunity to build for the next generations. So it's got a number of components, but it's worth putting the effort in because there's a lot at stake, a heck of a lot to gain if it can be done well. But of course, succession planning is tough for a number of reasons. Firstly, in agriculture, we tend to have most of our assets tied up in a lumpy farm or farms. Not much liquidity off the farm, which might be able to deal with off-farm siblings and help with retirement and that sort of thing. And of course, in family farms, the family and the business are interwoven. It's an emotional business, and there are often skeletons in the cupboard of past things and perceived injustices and unfairness and so on that can come in and cloud the process and make it hard to achieve what everyone would see as fairness in the process. And there is a changing need for retirement, for funds for retirement. People are living longer and wanting to do more things in their retirement, and very challenging. It needs a high level of people skills to handle all these emotions and business and family and business being interwoven. And sometimes those skills need some development before you can even start the process. And of course, in any succession plan, there are risks of events occurring that will make the plan unworkable or need to be changed, that sort of thing. And we're dealing with long time spans, and that means lots of things can happen over a time span. There can be health problems and breakups and all that sort of thing. So it requires a sustained effort over time. It's a tough job, but if we can pull it off, then the rewards are enormous. And a good basis really for succession planning, really the family needs to have good strategic, forward-looking planning skills, business planning skills, make it a lot easier because the family can be much more objective about the potential for the business side, opportunities that might come up, and ways in which everyone can get a satisfactory outcome out of the process. But one thing that I'd really put in capitals and in red as well is the earlier you can start, then the more opportunities are there, the more that the process can be used as a stimulus for family and business development, where a family can say, gee, if we're trying to do this 30 years down the track, we need to look at this opportunity, that opportunity. We need a business of that sort of size. We need these sort of businesses sitting around the farm. Time allows a lot of manoeuvring to be able to satisfy the needs of all the family members. So the earlier it can start, not locking it in, because lots of things can happen, the better. And an equation I've often used with farm families to help them understand the differences and what each generation can bring to the table is this one, that we're trying to bring the energy and the formal training of young, and usually formal training of young people, together with the experience and the wisdom of parents, and adding excellent relationships between young and old, between family members. And if we can do that, we can achieve teamwork, we can achieve harmony, we can get productivity, and we can get progress. So if we look at bringing the best of each generation and building strong relationships, then we're in with a good chance here. So don't get indigestion at looking at this long list, but these are the bases that I believe we need to cover. I'll go through them fairly quickly, and that's why you'll need to do more work on each step. It is a complex task, and it does require sustained effort, because as you can see there are lots of steps. Now let's just take them one at a time. Relationship building. Before we can think about a complex and tough task like succession planning, we need to have good relationships within family members. And you don't do that overnight. So we really need strong leadership within families. We need a lot of effort to build trust between family members. That's the glue that allows difficult things to be dealt with, and give and take, and that sort of thing. And again, that doesn't happen instantly. We need to understand the different personalities of family members. In our particular family, when our son and daughter-in-law were coming home, we did personality tests, and it really helped us to understand where people were coming from, their views of the world, and the way they tackle particular problems. Some people are logical, other people are much more intuitive in what they do. And so different personalities, if we understood those before we start, then we know that when someone's doing something that makes us feel a little uncomfortable, that most of the time it's because that's the way they're built. And then we think, hey, how can we use that personality, that person's strengths, and the way that person looks at the world to help us in this process. So typically families have a range of personalities, and we need to understand what they are. And before we tackle succession planning, it's also important to make sure we've got the capabilities, we've got the skills and the knowledge within the family to be able to deal with such a difficult task in a really logical and good manner. And the skills that stand out, that are really needed for this sort of process, are people management skills, because we're dealing with emotions and people's futures. And business management skills that help us to realistically see what the family businesses, the farm and anything else that's around that, what they might be able to deliver in terms of options to family members. And part of the relationship building thing is for families to have fun together. If you can travel together, if you can have holidays together, build the relationships and have that level of trust and good relationships there before you even start, then you're in with a good chance of being able to ride through the rough waters and come out the other end with a good solution. And on top of that, before you start, we need our families to have good communication skills and good communication with one another. And so I'd be hoping that families looking towards succession will start nice and early. We'll have a habit of the family meeting, and that includes periodically the off-farm children, that the family has learned how to sit down, conduct a meeting with agendas and proper formal business, and learned how to communicate with one another, because so often we find that a crisis occurs, a family is trying to get through a crisis and there are succession elements involved, but they haven't learned how to sit down and have a meeting and communicate with one another. And so it's extremely difficult, A, to be learning how to communicate, and B, tackling a crisis or a difficult situation all at the one time. So preliminary planning here of relationship building and regular formal communication are pretty important. And we all know when you've got a formal meeting, people when the agenda's out, they start thinking, they do pre-meeting preparation, so they're not shooting from the hip in the meeting. And so it's a proper, I'm a firm believer that most of the real work that we do is done outside of meetings. We just come together to meetings to review what's been done and make some decisions about it. But if we're trying to think and do all the preparation while we're in a meeting, we're not likely to get a good outcome. So those two steps first, and then also before we start succession planning, we need to understand what it is. It's not an event that you do and that's done and that's it. It's really a process, and it's a process designed to achieve a smooth transfer between generations. But we're trying to not just do a transfer and that's it. We're trying to benefit the business, and we're trying to strengthen family relationships in the process. And it's very important that we look to do both things. It's not much joy when you see families, well, yes, the assets were transferred, but members of the family didn't speak to one another again for their lives. What is the cost of that? And we certainly want to avoid that sort of situation. So we want everyone to understand that it's a complex process. It will take time. We need everyone's input, and we need to cover all the bases, and we need to get agreement that this is the process we're going to go through, because then if the waters get rough, we can come back and say, hey, we agreed that these were the steps we were taking. We're here now. Don't rush to conclusions. Maybe we have to go back and do that earlier step a little bit better. But here is our roadmap that we're using to arrive at the best possible solution. We're not guessing up front what the solution will be. We're going to let the solution come out as a result of taking a step-by-step approach to the succession planning process. And so right at the beginning, we really need to know what the individual goals of members of the family are, what the family goals are as a family, and the needs of the individual family members. Now, they won't necessarily all be able to be satisfied, but if they're put on the table in a reasonable, fair sort of way, at least we've got a starting point for what people are trying to do with their lives. And often families, even though they spend a lot of time together, they don't get around to writing down their goals and sharing those goals with one another so that members of the family can support one another to achieve their goals. It gets back to trust a bit, because people won't share their goals if they think the family will ridicule them if they don't achieve their goals. There needs to be the trust that, hey, we're all in an uncertain world, we're going down a winding road, but if at any time we know what individual members of the family and the family as a whole are trying to achieve, then we're in with a better chance to help one another and the family achieve it. So we need our individual and family and business goals written and on the table, and that's where good formal meeting procedure can help for that to happen and be reviewed in the right sort of way. and then we can discuss how everyone can help the goals to be achieved. So that's a good starting point of succession planning. Not that all the goals or all the needs can be achieved, but at least they're on the table. And I've often found if the family, and this is usually relatively easy, if the family can agree on the family's goals, in other words, things like we want to have good relationships, we want to stick together, we want to help one another, we want to be a really close and trusting family. If you can nail that to the wall early, then if the going gets tough later on in the process, you can come back and say, hey, if we do this that we're thinking of, or this argument we're having, it's going to damage the achievement of our family goals. And so you can got something to come back to and say, well, look, we really, a consequence if we go down this path that doesn't look too good is that we'll lose some of our family benefits. Everybody can sit back a bit and say, gee, yeah, we'd better find some compromise here or another way of doing it. So nailing the family goals to the wall is an important part of this process. So the next base to cover is to consider all the options, and this is where you need the good planning skills, the long-term planning, strategic, looking at opportunities that might come up down the track, the business management skills, the ability to see where the business is at and what the potential for the business to produce is. And so we need strong business management skills. We need members of the family to understand that. And understand what's going on there, being prepared to do the homework and look at all the possibilities. So consider the potential opportunities and threats, and jobs need to be divided out amongst the family to research this, research that, come back and tell us what you think the opportunities are for the family in this area, in tourism, or running a business in town, or doing custom farming, or whatever. Try and be as creative as possible, and that's where different personalities, there may be members of the family that have real creative skills that can come in. And very importantly, in this day and age, we've got to correct some of the mistakes of the past where farming was a male chauvinistic business. I've seen too many family farms lost out of the family because they were blind to the fact that a daughter had the skills and the enthusiasm and the interest to carry on the farm. And so it's important when you're considering the options that there isn't any gender bias or age bias so that we get fairness in the process. You can consider adding businesses, but that takes research, and you have to think of the skills that you've got and the skills that might need to be developed. And as a general rule, it's good to try and keep the eggs unscrambled. Try and keep, in the plans that might evolve, reasonable independence between family members if you can. Not always super possible, but it's something to sort of aim for because we want our younger generation to have some freedom to show their management skills and feel as though they're standing clear of the shadow of their parents. So we want at least some aspects where there is a reasonable amount of freedom once it's earned. It's got to be earned first. The younger generation have got to prove they're ready for that sort of responsibility, but we should head for that if we possibly can. So we've done the preparatory work, we've got good relationships, we've got our goals on the table, we've done the hard yards of putting a lot of information on the table about the options that the family has in terms of business development and ultimately succession and the way assets might be transferred and retirement might happen and those sorts of things. We then need to think about when a son or a daughter have come home and worked for a number of years, we need to think about the plan for the transfer of management. And that usually takes place well before the transfer of ownership because young people typically, that's what they want to do. They want to develop their skills, their management skills, and they need an opportunity. And so quite important for young people to, if it's at all possible, initially leave the farm and go and get experience clear of the family So they build confidence that they could operate on their own in the world without the backing of family if they had to. And at the same time, international experience means young people can get ideas that they can bring back. Corporate experience can bring networks that might be useful to the farm business, and might even, if they're research organisation, agribusiness organisations, lead to on-farm research being funded by agribusiness organisations, and of course then being very valuable to the farm business. So if at all possible, young people should get some experience off farm before coming home. And then when they come home, instead of with all that enthusiasm wanting to turn the farm upside down, if there's opportunity to conduct trials which won't put the farm business at risk, but which will help young people prove their ideas and get experience, then that can be good. Maybe an area can be leased on another farm where a son or a daughter can conduct an enterprise and get the experience of doing it on their own. Various ways without putting the family at risk. I have seen too many examples, I'm afraid, where sons and daughters have come home from college or other experiences and have asked that the farm be turned upside down in terms of what it does. The parents, with their experience, maybe have thought this is not a good idea, but maybe have acceded to it, and it's led to real problems in the family business. So we need trials, we need to ease on, and young people need to build their reputation. You can add separate businesses to allow for that experience, again without damaging the farm business. So various ways in which we need our young people to get the experience necessary. We don't want 40-year-old men and women, children of a family who've never made a real decision on the farm in their life, inheriting a farm because their parents have died or whatever. That's when businesses get destroyed very, very quickly. But we need to use mum and dad's memory bank. We need to use their experience. And so this is, again, where good communication, good relationships, we're going to work that equation between the energy and formal training of youth and the experience and wisdom of the parents. So the planning of the transfer of management needs to be done in an ordered sort of way, but we must do it in order to build experience for the younger generation. And so I guess there are three components we're trying to juggle here. The son or daughter might come home, and mum and dad and son and daughter, they decide how they'll divide up the operational tasks. That's the first sort of step. And then this transfer of management, and then finally the transfer of ownership. And I rather like this quote from the Bishop family in Nova Scotia in Canada. It's sort of indicative of the attitude that we need in families in order to use succession planning not as a task that has to be done for the transfer of assets, but an opportunity to build for the future, to grow the family business, to grow family relationships as well. And so in one publication I saw, Andrew Bishop, the father, said, we had to decide whether to coast or invest in the future. I made a decision to invest in the next generation. And that particular family has wide-ranging enterprises, and now the next generation is taking much more of a management role in that business. So that's the sort of attitude we need, and the sort of reward we can get if we go about this succession planning in the right sort of way. So we've planned our management transfer, then we need to plan the tough one of asset transfer. And generally speaking, it's best to sort out this asset transfer every generation. Cousins, the risk of cousins not working well together is pretty high. And in any case, if cousins do find a way of working together, they can work back together. But it's better that they work back from separate enterprises that have been sorted out on each generation. There's some great difficulties when a family will fail. Maybe two brothers work well together, but there's no guessing that their children will work together. It just makes it much more complicated and risky. We need to understand with asset transfer that fairness does not necessarily mean equal asset distribution. This is just not possible in most family businesses, given the lumpiness of the assets that are tied up in the farm, and the need these days not to diminish the size of farming businesses, but in fact to grow the size to fit in with the scale that's necessary for new technologies and the way the industry is going. And so I'm a great believer in striving for, not always possible, what I call a living inheritance, where maybe off-farm children, when they're in their 30s, receive a small amount of money when they really need it, and it can give them a leg up to do all sorts of things. And because they've got that living inheritance, then they're going to make less of a claim on the farm at a later stage. It also avoids the problem of whoever is the son or daughter who's on the farm, the fact that the harder they work, the more valuable the farm is, the more they've got to pay their sisters and brothers out. It starts to get over that sort of problem. So if you start early enough, you can plan to have a living inheritance as a way of helping the asset transfer, particularly to non-farming members of the family. So that might be something worth thinking about. And we need to understand that wills are an integral part of the succession planning. Wills change, of course, can change. But the more that the wills can be shared because they're part of the process, the more the family will understand what the intentions of the parents are, and they can therefore plan. There's no joy in a family member having a certain expectation and 30 years later when their parents die finding their expectation was wrong. This is the sort of thing that can break up family relationships. And also wills that aren't properly thought out. I had a case in the United Kingdom a couple of years ago where a family business had effectively been on hold for 10 years because the will had been challenged, and that meant one generation really couldn't do much at all, very frustrated because the wills were not properly set out and they ended up being challenged. But we need to respect the fact that the parents as owners of the business do have the rights, and with the rights come responsibilities to make the ultimate decisions in this process. Hopefully the parents will compromise and will win the trust, and there'll be give and take and so on. But at the end of the day, young people need to understand that their parents are owners of the business and they have some control over the way it goes. But that's not taking it to the point where forget about succession, mum and dad will make up their mind, that's the way it's going to happen. That is what destroys relationships too. So the mum and dads have to be smarter than that and have to be prepared to go through the sort of process that we're discussing. So we've transferred, or have got a plan for transferring management, a plan for transferring assets, and we need to prepare for retirement. Now, retirement for most farmers isn't easy. In fact, poor mum sometimes is caught here between loyalty to her husband and loyalty to her kids in how the retirement works and so on. A lot of farmers don't have a lot of outside activities but need to be encouraged to have them. Tend to be in a situation of who I am is what I do, and if I leave the farm, what am I? Who am I? We need to mitigate over many years against that so that parents feel happy to make a transition into the community or have a different role on the farm or develop other interests, that sort of thing. And this whole retirement business is changing because parents are living longer. And the expectation of retirees used to be a reasonably humble one that didn't involve much expenditure, but now with parents living longer and being in better health, they want to travel, they want to do things they haven't been able to do while they've been tied to the farm, and this takes resources and therefore has to be planned for. So again, start retirement actions early, to develop other interests, to look to get funds off the farm, maybe have some other businesses off farm, but a need to clear some space for the younger generation while they're young, healthy, energy, well educated, to have a maximum chance to help develop the family business. So it's all changing, and another reason for the living inheritance we talked about, of course, is that parents are living longer, and often by the time they die, in traditional inheritance, the next generation down are really well past their time for major expenditure. And so the inheritance almost needs to jump a generation. But if it's a living inheritance, then you can deal with this longevity problem and still give young people the leg up, particularly at the time time in their lives when they need it, when the mortgage, the careers, and the cost of kids and so on are all hitting at once in their 30s. Very important for the younger generation to understand that the parents' needs to be wanted and valued and respected need to be accommodated in this process. I've seen some shocking situations where the sort of impression that the mum and dads have got is, oh look, you're finished now, we're taking over, just go and sit over on the side and leave it to us, which is a real put down and very damaging to relationships. And strictly speaking, full retirement has not occurred until the next generation has full financial control. And some mums and dads sort of half hang on. They've neither handed over control or have full control, and that can be very hard for the next generation to get stuck into it and develop the business and the family as much as they might. So we need to be fairly clear about that. When you've gone through all those steps, and really only then, because the family has to do the work. Every succession plan is different. Someone else can't do your succession plan for you, but it is important to make sure that there aren't any financial considerations, tax considerations that you haven't thought of, legal considerations you haven't thought of with wills and with the succession plan, and financial planning. Just run your plans, your business plans by outsiders to make sure that they're as good as they can be and they're realistic and that sort of thing. And because this is a people business as well, succession planning, you might need to go to family relationship experts and say, hey, is this likely to lead to family relationship problems? Is there anything we can do to make it better? That sort of thing. But really only after the family have done a lot of the hard work. And there's a danger that some of these experts may have pretty narrow perspectives and they're not able to look right across the board at the full range of things that the family has to consider. So the family's got to do the thinking, but it's wise to go to experts when you've got a draft plan and say, hey, are there any problems, likely to be any problems with this that we might be able to fix at this stage in the piece. And then because it's a long-term process and we don't know what's going to happen down that winding road, we need some contingency planning. Marriages, births, deaths, disabilities, divorces, remarriages, lots of things can happen. We need to do the what-ifs, but not to the point of becoming paranoid. I've seen some families that really box its shadows, and that can bring on divorces and can bring on breakdowns in relationship if by doing things in a certain way they're indicating that there isn't a level of trust within the family. Nevertheless, families have to be realistic, the parents have to be realistic. They've worked hard to build the assets and they certainly don't want them to be destroyed in any untoward way. So there needs to be a bit of thought here. Sometimes forgivable loans, those sort of approaches can help just mitigate against some of the risks of some of the things that can happen when you've got a long-term process involved and people involved where all sorts of things might happen. And because it is a long-term process and because things can happen, we need regular reviews of plans, particularly when significant events like a new baby or a marriage occur. Review at least annually and keep on building trust so that although the exact outcomes aren't certain, family members are confident that the criteria that have been set and the process that's been gone through will be applied fairly to family members. So in conclusion, succession planning is just part of good family and business management. And more as I go through these days, I think that by starting early, it can be a stimulus for development of the family businesses in order to accommodate succession needs. But you can't do that if you start too late. You just haven't got time, usually, to do much in that area. Always remember the purpose. It's much more than transfer of assets. You're looking for a smooth transfer, but you're looking to benefit the business and you're looking to strengthen family relationships. Start early, agree to a process, something to come back to when the going gets tough, and to guide the process through to a good solution. Recognise that good succession planning requires considerable skill and effort, but the rewards make this worthwhile. Understand that you need strong leadership, good communication, good people management, which will be tough at times. You need to build relationships and build trust to help this process really work. But understand the reward at the end, that families that can plan together and work together and build towards the next generation and play together, have fun together, can achieve great happiness, great satisfaction and great rewards. So my family wish you great success. We've got 2 grandchildren now and we're planning ahead because they'll probably be alive at the end of this next century, and we're planning ahead to have resilient family relationships, resilient family businesses. It's one thing family can do. They can have a longer term view than many corporates and get a lot better outcomes if they go about this sort of process. So thank you, and we wish you every success with your succession planning. Thank you.